Welcome to the middle of the week. It's a Wednesday edition here of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from that website right there, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, where we ask you to subscribe and follow all of the Pitt content and news and reporting that's going on there, analysis, videos, interviews, write-ups, transcripts, everything you could look for as a Pitt fan is right there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, and then, of course, we have this here, a little video extension of youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Click that subscribe button right around in there, and you will and you can turn on notifications. You'll get alerts sent to your phone every time we go live for a live Panther-Lair show, which is not going to be tonight. I repeat, no live Panther-Lair show tonight. Pitt basketball is an exhibition game. We're going to go cover that, and then we'll talk about that tomorrow night for a special Thursday live edition of the Panther-Lair show. So mark your calendars, adjust your schedules, call your wives and girlfriends or husbands and boyfriends or children, whatever it is, whoever you have plans with, tell them you have to cancel your plans because you've got to check out the Panther-Lair show live on a Thursday night at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, Thursday night at 8:30 p.m. I'm going to keep reminding that over and over again, and I'm sure people will be asking me tonight, hey, where's the show? That's all right. We try and inform people in as many different places as possible when we have to make a change like this. So we'll be live tomorrow night talking about everything going on in Pitt sports, getting you ready for Pitt-Syracuse Saturday at Acrisure Stadium, 3:30 p.m. kickoff. And of course, we'll be live after the game for the post-game show. I'm hoping we'll be live around 10 o'clock. Kind of depends on when I get back to the offices, the Panther-Lair office from the stadium. But there again, if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, you click that subscribe button, you turn on notifications, you'll get an alert when we go live. So you don't even have to worry about like, oh, what time are they going live after the game? What time's the post-game show? I don't even know. You don't have to worry about it because you'll get a notification. So like this video while you're here and click subscribe. Do us a solid. Like I said, Pitt is taking on Syracuse, the Orange from the Atlantic Division of the ACC, as you are well aware. Syracuse, of course, at this point is 6-2 after they got fairly blown out by Notre Dame at home last weekend. Garrett Schrader, the quarterback, got hurt. He has played well this season. He's been pretty good. I don't know what the latest is on whether or not he is going to play this weekend. I mean, if I had to guess, I would say he probably will. We'll find out. We'll see what updates come out as we move through the week. But with Syracuse, what's interesting to me, I mean, there are interesting sides of this matchup. Obviously, Syracuse hired a new offensive coordinator who seems to have made a big difference for Garrett Schrader and for the Orange offense as a whole. They still like to use running back Sean Tucker a lot, although Pitt largely contained Tucker. Actually, not largely. I mean, I don't need any qualifiers or caveats. They did contain Sean Tucker last season when the two teams met at the Dome in Syracuse. But what's interesting to me about this series, about this game and about this series overall is, while I think we tend to just say, well, it's just Syracuse, and I don't mean necessarily just this year, but overall, we tend to sort of dismiss Syracuse because they've just sort of been the bumbling Orange for, the better part of the last 2 decades. Early 2000s, they were a competent team, but they really haven't been all that good for quite some time. You know what I mean? I think you can look at why they weren't that good. I mean, I think Paul Pasqualoni is a big, his departure and sort of how they moved forward from there was really kind of it's been a disaster. What was it? Greg Robinson, like the other Dave Wanstead in the Big East at that time. It's funny, just as a quick sidetrack, I was having this conversation the other day about the Connecticut football program. Connecticut, not talking about Syracuse, but, Connecticut hired Paul Pasqualoni after Randy Edsall left to be the head coach at Maryland. And I feel like that was really a turning point for that Connecticut football program, that they were on a certain path and they really had a chance to continue pushing it forward, but they made the wrong hire. They hired the wrong guy. They hired the wrong, I hate to say retread, but I mean, that's admittedly what he was at that point. And then, of course, they got left out of the conference reshuffling and the football program has fallen apart, which makes Boston College's loss to UConn over the weekend look even worse. But I digress. Despite the fact that Syracuse has largely been a bumbling, fumbling football program for the last 2 decades, more or less, they've given Pitt a hard time. They have not been an easy out for Pitt, particularly since the two programs joined the ACC. And even the year before that, we could talk about we could talk about a few things here. But there's always a question that comes up of whether or not Pitt and Syracuse are truly rivals. The ACC paired them as crossover opponent rivals, Pitt from the Coastal Division, Syracuse from the Atlantic. The ACC paired them up as cross-division rivals, largely because they were like, well, who cares? We're not going to disrupt any of our other crossover division rivals. We're going to put the two of you goofballs together since you just came in together. We're going to put you guys together, and that's what we'll go with. That way no one else has to play you on an annual basis, and we'll keep as much of the status quo as we possibly can. And so they paired Pitt and Syracuse. And I don't think prior to 2013, prior to the ACC declaring that Pitt and Syracuse were rivals, I don't think anyone on either side of this would think that they were rivals. And I don't think any rivalry has really emerged as a result of the ACC pairing them together. But I will say this, and I don't watch Syracuse every week. I don't watch Syracuse games every week. I'll put them on sometimes if they're playing an interesting opponent, and it doesn't overlap with watching a Pitt game or another game I'm interested in or anything else I have to do. But I will occasionally put them on. I don't watch them enough to say for certain what happens in other games. But it does seem when Syracuse plays Pitt, when Pitt plays Syracuse, there's a little extra chippiness. And I don't know if sometimes it's because, games at the Dome, going kind of behind the curtain here a little bit, the press box at the Dome is closer to the field than just about anywhere else. It's open because why would you need windows? You're indoors. And so being closer to the field and having an open press box where, I feel like you're much closer to the action and you can sort of hear and feel the action more than almost any other stadium I've ever covered a game. More even than sometimes being at like high school stadiums. And I think that's because it's closed in. So that sound really stays in and you can hear the hits and you can almost feel the hits and you can see the action that much more closely. And I just feel like these games over the years, and it's the same to some extent when the games have been at Heinz Field, and we'll find out this Saturday at Acrisure Stadium if it carries over. But the games in the Dome and to some extent at Heinz Field have been chippy games. There have been cheap shots in these games, and I say that I don't watch Syracuse all the time because I don't know if this is a Syracuse thing. If Syracuse is a dirty team or something, or if they tend to take cheap shots, or if it's just sort of there's something that comes out in an animosity toward Pitt. But I do notice a little extra edge when Pitt and Syracuse play, whether they won it or not. And I think there are teams that, if you ask the Pitt players, who are you circling on the schedule more? I mean, for a number of years, it was North Carolina. North Carolina was the one they always circled because they just couldn't win. After they joined the ACC, it took until 2019. So how many games is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games in a row before they could finally beat North Carolina. And then they did it twice in a row. They didn't play in 2020, but they beat them in 2021 also before losing, of course, this past weekend. But that was a game they circled, not Duke, not Virginia. I think there's a little bit, maybe not even Miami all that much. I mean, I think once you get to Miami week, you get excited about Miami. You look forward to Miami. I think Virginia Tech has had some chippiness. I think there's been some genuine dislike between those two programs over the years, stemming from a variety of sources. But there's something about Syracuse that, and maybe for the Pitt players, I don't think they circle the Syracuse game on the calendar, ahead of time. And maybe they don't really think about it outside of that week. But I think once they get into that week, I think there is some dislike for Syracuse because there seems to be a little bit of, like I say, extra chippiness. And maybe some of that stems from the fact that they played a lot of close games. Looking back over kind of the recent history of this series, and this is a series with considerable history. Syracuse is Pitt's third most played opponent of all time. They've played West Virginia 104 times, 105 now, I guess, counting this year. They're 62-40-3 against West Virginia. They've played Penn State an even 100 times, and then this will be the 78th meeting with Syracuse. They haven't played anyone else more than they played Syracuse, other than Penn State and West Virginia. Even Notre Dame, they faced Notre Dame 72 times. So Syracuse is number 3. You have other interesting teams on the list. There's actually a significant drop-off, right? So you have West Virginia 105 games, Penn State 100 games, Syracuse 77 games, about to be 78 on Saturday. Notre Dame 72 games, and then you have this big drop off to Miami with 41 games. Navy with 40 games. I always respect teams that have played Navy a lot. It feels like you are a team with a lot of history in college football if you've played a lot of games against Navy. Because Navy feels like a classic 1930s black and white. The goalpost is at the front, the goal line. You know what I mean? The goalpost is on the goal line. That's what I picture when I think of Navy football. And so if you've played a lot of games against Navy, I sort of envision you playing them all in that environment. But Pitt has played Navy 40 times. They played Temple 36 times. Washington and Jefferson 33 times. And after that, I thought it was interesting. They played Ohio State 25 times. Nebraska 24 times. Of course, Rutgers, they played 30 times as members of the Big East. But Syracuse is up there, right? Number 3 all time, about to be 78. They have the longest consecutive stretch of games played, like the longest ongoing active series, I guess you would say. They've played 67 consecutive years dating back to 1955. This will be 68 this year. And they haven't played anyone else that many years in a row. And obviously, because, West Virginia, they just played for the first time in 11 years. Penn State, they haven't played in, 3 years now? And Notre Dame, they haven't played in 4 years. So, or I guess 2 years. They played them in 2020. But that was, that's intermittent and definitely with breaks in the series. So there's definitely, in terms of games played and consecutive years with games played, there's a history with Syracuse. There's the kind of familiarity that should breed some contempt. Maybe because the series has been so lopsided on each side, where you get a stretch where Pitt wins a bunch of games, and then you get a stretch where Syracuse wins a bunch of games, and then it bounces back, and then it bounces back. We're right now in a Pitt stretch. Pitt has lost 1 game against Syracuse since 2013, and so you're looking at 8-1 over the last 9 years, over the last 9 games played. And so it's pretty lopsided in Pitt's favor. But what's interesting is, since these two teams joined the ACC in 2013, even if Pitt has come out ahead, and has an 8-1 record in those 9 games, there have been a lot of close games. There haven't been a lot in the way of blowouts. 2014 was a 30-7 Pitt win. If you can remember anything about that game, you can probably remember some things about that season, but if you can remember anything about the 2014 game against Syracuse, kudos to you. Because I think a lot about this team. I think a lot about Pitt. I write about Pitt. I talk about Pitt every friggin' day, and I can't tell you a single detail about that 2014 game. Was A.J. Long the quarterback, or was that in 2011? I cannot remember, because it just doesn't matter to me. But they won that game by 23 points. Of course, the 76-61 game was a 15-point game. They also had a 17-point game last year, and then in 2020, they beat them by 11. But out of those 9 games, 5 out of the 9 were one-score games. And even some of these other ones we're talking about, the 2-score games, there's still an 11-point game in there, a 15-point game in there, and then a 17 and a 23-point game. So not really much in the way of blowouts, whereas Pitt was winning fairly comfortably. They lost in 2004 in double overtime. And then, 2005 through 2011, you have it, all the games were decided, they were all Pitt wins, 2005 to 2011. And they were all 2-score wins, other than the 2007 game, which was a 20-17 game. You remember that? Maybe not that game, but you remember that 2007 Pitt team. And so it was pretty lopsided in Pitt's favor. And then 2012, Paul Chryst's first year, I think the game was up there, because I think they played in back-to-back years at the Dome, or maybe 3 years in a row at the Dome. And they ended up losing. They lost 14-13. The next year, they joined the ACC, 2013. Game was up there. Paul Chryst, second time going up there. Aaron Donald blocked an extra point, and Pitt ended up winning 17-16. You talk about slim margin of victory. A 1-point game where, the best player on your team blocks an extra point. That's a pretty good one right there. 2014 was that 30-7 game I talked about. And then in 2015, Panthers' first year, Pitt goes up to the Dome, and they end up winning 23-20. You remember the circumstances of that. Pitt's driving late in the fourth quarter. They get a fourth down at midfield. They bring the punt team out, and Ryan Winslow throws a pass to Matt Galambos to keep the drive alive, and then Chris Blewett makes a field goal to break the tie and win the game at 23-20. So, one of those close games that, I think that was one of those games, that was one of those moments that season, that 2015 season, where I think everybody got really excited about Pat Narduzzi. There was a 4-game winning streak. It was like Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Georgia Tech. I think 2 of the games were won on long field goals, the Syracuse and the Georgia Tech game. The Virginia Tech game were won on like defensive stands at the end of the game, and it was like, look at this. This guy's actually going to... And this was right after they had just gone out to Iowa and almost beat Iowa, but lost on like a 60-yard field goal. I think there was a lot of enthusiasm around Pat Narduzzi at this point, and the fact that he won the Syracuse game by going for it on fourth down with a trick play pass from the punter to a linebacker. I think there was a lot of excitement, but very close game. Barely escape with a win. The next year, 2016, it's a 15-point game, but it's 76-61. A 2-score win, but you wouldn't say that it was exactly a blowout because those two teams just kept trading blows. And I've been in only a few post-game press conferences after a win where the mood was somber and they were acting like it was a loss. That was one of them. Pat Narduzzi was not happy at the end of that game. And you know what? It wasn't even just him. I mean, I remember talking to James Conner at the end of that game, and he was distraught over it. I mean, like, they weren't going to be mad about a win. I think it was the end of the regular season. It got them to 8 wins. But nobody was really happy, despite the fact that they just ended the regular season on a victory, and they were waiting their bowl destination and all of that. 2017 was actually a loss, 27-24. That was the game when Kenny Pickett made his debut. He showed up in the Dome. Max Brown got hurt. Ben DiNucci came in. Ben DiNucci's helmet fell off, so he had to leave the game for the final snap in regulation, and Kenny Pickett came out and played 1 snap, burning his red shirt and changing Pitt football history. I mean, for all intents and purposes, who knows what direction things would have gone, what would have happened if Pickett didn't play that day. But that game, 27-24, I have a memory of Syracuse converting a third down on a roughing penalty or late hit out of bounds penalty on Chase Pine. Like late in the game in a crucial situation where Pitt had an opportunity to get the ball back, get off the field on third down, and Syracuse got a fresh set of downs in 15 yards because of a poor decision on a personal foul penalty. 2018, just like why am I recounting each of these games of Pitt-Syracuse? Because there's such I think there's such an interesting kind of backstory on almost every one of these games, whether it's Aaron Donald blocking an extra point, the highest scoring game in college football history, I think, right? Is that what it was? 137 points. Pat Narduzzi running a fake punt, Pitt losing in the game where Kenny Pickett makes his debut, and then 2018, a 44-37 win in overtime. I think that was Theron Coleman who made the game-winning interception to close down Syracuse's overtime drive. And more importantly, that game was a jumping-off point for Pitt because they had just, they had lost at North Carolina 38-35. They had just gotten smoked at UCF, and they came back to play a top 15 Syracuse team at Heinz Field. And believe me, I think they had 2 wins at that point. It couldn't have been a more dismal scenario. And everyone expected Pitt to get crushed and get blown out. They had no chance. They couldn't stop UNC. They couldn't stop UCF. The offense looked like crap. How are they going to possibly score or win this game? And they end up, winning in overtime, 44-37, the first of what would be 5 consecutive ACC wins to ultimately clinch the Coastal Division. They went out to Notre Dame the next week and had a close loss, and then came back and won 4 more ACC games in a row to ultimately clinch the Coastal. And the first sort of big achievement of Pat Narduzzi's time at Pitt, the jumping off point was a game against Syracuse. 2019, not really a remarkable game. In a season full of unremarkable games, that was an unremarkable game. But again, another 1-score game, 27-20. But if you recall, it was sort of... It was a classic 2019 game when I think of it. Not so much in the sense that they lost the game, because they didn't, but they built up like a 3-score lead by halftime. Pitt was well in control. And then the offense just went absolutely into a hole in the second half, and a few busted plays on defense, and it ends up being a 27-20 game. I think there was a trick play that Pitt was able to score on in the first half, but the offense just went completely bust in the second half. And like I said, the defense blew it on a couple snaps and ended up letting Syracuse back in the game for a 27-20 win, a one-score win that should have been considerably more. 2020, not much to say about that. Kind of like the rest of the COVID season. I mean, 2020 was an unremarkable year overall, but Pitt wins 21-10 in that game. I don't think there was a whole lot to say other than they probably should have won that by more, and maybe that was a bit of a red flag on that season that ultimately rebounded in the second half, but had some pretty dark moments. And then last year's game, a 31-14 game, really a 17-point win, the biggest win in this series for either team going back to 2014. A game where I don't think anybody was healthy. I think a lot of guys were sick. They were coming down with the flu. I remember hearing on the plane ride home from Syracuse, everybody was coughing and hacking, and the flu was going around. I mean, it was a tough situation. And they tried to play it as easy as possible and rest guys and not take too many chances. They end up winning 31-14, but it was really sort of they tried to make it as much of a rest day as possible before the ACC championship game the following week. And so it's remarkable. I mean, aside from the last 2 years, kind of the backstories in almost every game between these two teams throughout their time in the ACC together, that there's so many interesting stories here for a series that I don't think of as being all that remarkable. I don't think you think of Pitt-Syracuse as being all that remarkable. No one's circling it on the calendar. No one gets the schedule, and the first thing they do is scan, for the orange, the blue S or the orange S or whatever the logo is that year. Nobody looks ahead to it. Nobody's like, man, can't wait for Pitt-Syracuse. I mean, we know there's nobody lining up to get into this game on Saturday. And yet it's produced some, if not classic games, some pretty interesting games, some pretty notable games, and some games that have had a pretty big impact on their seasons, or even in the bigger picture than that. So is Pitt-Syracuse a rivalry? I don't know, but it has produced some pretty interesting outcomes over the last decade or so. All right, one thing we forgot to do yesterday is go around the Coastal. We usually do that on Tuesdays. Didn't get a chance to recap the Coastal yesterday, so I just wanted to run through that real quick. I know it becomes less and less significant as Pitt slides further and further out of contention, but just looking over the last week, Duke was off. Everybody else was in action. Virginia Tech got it started on Thursday night at NC State. A game that I found my eyes drifting toward at the bar more than the lousy NFL game, whatever that was. Ravens, forget who they were playing. Don't even care. But anyway, Virginia Tech loses to NC State 22-21. Virginia Tech led this game 21-10. Going into the fourth quarter, NC State came back in the fourth, and Virginia Tech is a mess. They're 2-6 overall. They're worse than Pitt, understandably so. And that's going to be a real rebuilding project. Elsewhere in the Coastal, Georgia Tech went to Florida State and got thumped 41-16. This game was never even really in question, never all that close. Georgia Tech's 3-5. They're 2-3 in the ACC, about where they should be. Actually, I mean, they should be 1-4 in the ACC. They should be 2-6 overall. Pitt should not have lost to that team. That will continue to be the one that sticks out the most, although Louisville and Carolina definitely deserve some consideration as far as the losses that sting Pitt the most. But that Georgia Tech game is the worst of all. And then a 4 overtime game. This is amazing. Miami beats Virginia in 4 overtimes in Charlottesville. And the final score of a 4 overtime game, 14-12. 14-12 in a 4 overtime game. What an absolute disaster that was. What an abject... I learned that you have to... what even happened there? He went for 2 at the end. They had to run 2-point plays starting in the 4th overtime. You couldn't kick field goals anymore, which thankfully, because how many field goals did they have to that point? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 field goals, 4 for each team. Before they Miami scores a 2-point conversion to win the game 14-12 in the 4th overtime. Miami, they were playing without Tyler Van Dyke. which, you know, didn't go well, obviously. They throw for 125 yards. Henry Parrish leads the way, 114 yards on 25 carries. Doesn't score a touchdown because nobody scored a touchdown. Colby Young, the junior college receiver that Pitt tried to get but couldn't get into school, was the leading receiver for Miami, 5 catches for 46 yards. Virginia is just an absolute mess. Brennan Armstrong, 15 of 25, 208. No interceptions. He runs 20 times for 67 yards. He's the leading rusher. I mean, Virginia's a mess. Miami without Tyler Van Dyke is a mess. Miami with Tyler Van Dyke wasn't that much less of a mess to begin with. It's just, you know, those are two teams that Pitt really should expect to beat. But we know Pitt's got their own issues, and so can't really count anyone as a win at this point. Can't really say anybody should be a win. The should be wins, or should have won games. There have been a few of them already, and Pitt has lost them. So can't really count on anything at this point. All right, that about does it for today. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video. We appreciate that very much. Remember, no live Panther Lair show tonight. We will not be live tonight. We'll be live tomorrow night. Got a Pitt basketball exhibition game tonight. We'll talk about it on the Morning Pitt tomorrow. We'll probably get into that conversation as well on the Panther Lair show tomorrow night. Stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.Rivals.com for the latest in Pitt sports news coverage. And thanks again, as always, for watching the Morning Pitt. We have a lot of fun doing these every day of the week, Monday through Friday. Hope you enjoy watching or listening if you listen to the podcast. But you should check out the video because, I mean, you know, come for the goods. You know what I'm saying? All right, thanks again. We will see you on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. And we'll talk to you again on Thursday morning for the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.